reports are saying that API representation is just about 3.8% in cable and like 3.2% in streaming. Now, as someone who's on the inside of an organization that's trying to bridge this gap, what are the challenges that you are actually dealing with, between this data?
I think a very visible example is Crazy Rich Asians. I think in our community, when I first got to Cape, or when I started to enter this bubble, even before I was at Cape, I remember people would refer to it as like pre-CRA and post-CRA. And I think it really made an impact on, other communities outside of the API community. I think knowing who your community is and being really clear on that is a really good North Star. And I think Rhode did a great job.
Hi, I'm Ritika Agrawal.
And I'm Chandni Sharma Modi.
And we're on Off Script. Hi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited because we've been going back and forth on making this happen, and we're in Chicago.
I know. It worked out perfectly, and I'm so glad this day worked for you, but I'm so happy to be here with you and make more friends in Chicago.
Yes, absolutely. And also, thank you. We're finally in our third city in the country. We've been filming in LA and in New York, and you're our first episode in Chicago, so this is actually a huge moment for the show.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Props to you. It's quite a feat. I can't imagine all the coordination. I mean, even our coordination took a while.
But it worked out.
Yeah, it's perfect. Meant to be.
Yes, exactly. Awesome. So I want to get into talking about everything that you've been building and everything that you've been doing. And it's funny because on this show, I've been, interviewing actors, writers, directors, producers, and you're the first person that's kind of on the behind the scenes a little bit, building the infrastructure. So now for our audience who doesn't really know your background, you started at Goldman Sachs and then moved on to being head of culture and impact at Rhode. And now you are heading the strategic development at CAPE, which is a nonprofit organization that's kind of building the foundation for API in Hollywood, essentially, for the last 35 years. Tell us more about what that infrastructure is. How are you building it for representation to truly be seen, but also really shine on screen?
Yeah. So I think the thread across those three places and my career so far has been social impact. So at each of those places, it's looked different. At Goldman, it was much more broad. And then at Rhode, it was really focused on women's reproductive health. And then here at CAPE, like you said, really focused on representation and storytelling, specifically around the API community in film and TV. And so CAPE's strategy really is focused on tackling all different avenues of the industry and supporting our community throughout their career. So thinking about someone at the beginning of their career, maybe when they're an assistant, or if someone's, producing their first short film, how do we support them at that stage? So then as they continue to do incredible things throughout their career, they are still connected with the organization, far down the road. But then on that note, they continue to become champions for the community and the next gen. And so I think it's created this really incredible feedback loop. And, for all of us, we have our mentors that have helped us. And I think what inspires us to do that for the next group or the next round is that, learned experience of having it done for ourselves. And then we continue to mimic those habits and do that for, others. So that's really, I would say, at the core of what CAPE does. That's what they're building and what we've been building. I can't take so much credit because I've really only been there for a bit over a year now, but 35 years, it's hard to build something for that long.
Yeah.
And so a lot of, the success comes from the alumni. So now after 35 years of programs and fellowships and cohorts, there is such a massive community of alumni who have gone on to do incredible things. They're either execs at studios or they have become, award-winning producers, filmmakers, whatever the case is. And so they really champion the community and figure out ways to continue to support.
That's incredible. What drew you to CAPE for your next chapter?
I think at Goldman and at Rhode, although I loved the social impact work, Goldman, I have only incredible things to say about just the learnings from, starting out of college. You really go through an intense but really meaningful lesson on what it means to be a professional and what excellence looks like at work. And then at Rhode, because there was so much exposure and so many eyes on the company because of the founder and then just the brand itself being such a, an industry leading brand, I think you really focus on how to present yourself and your work in a way that is excellent and also understand risk aversion. So if you have so many eyes on the work you're doing, how do you make sure you're so thoughtful in the process and the development of launching something so that once it's out there, hopefully you've put all the care into it so that people respond to it and are excited about it and it's really appealing to what their needs are. So,
Yeah.
taking feedback into consideration. I think all those lessons really taught me, incredible ways of building programs or building community. But when I got to LA a few years ago, I think I really wanted to connect more with our community. And of course, one, I wanted to connect with the South Asian community, but then the API community at large, I felt like, I was a part of, but I wasn't as integrated in. And so I really wanted to transfer the skills that I had developed from incredible institutions like Goldman and incredible brands like Rhode and bring it to our community and figure out how do we bridge brands and corporations with our community, especially when we look at their philanthropic dollars, because there's so many competing needs in the world. Of course, there's so many incredible causes. I think we have seen a major shift in storytelling. Like storytelling is actually how you get a lot of work done. When you look at some of the largest foundations in the world, the biggest foundations, they are probably going after, figuring out and solving for worldwide issues like health, for instance.
Yeah.
But the way you shift perspectives at home is through storytelling. So then you find that they're investing into storytelling through different organizations. CAPE's a great example. Or, there's so many organizations in this larger ecosystem that you're seeing both individual and philanthropic dollars go into because that's how you're changing minds and changing perspectives.
I love that you said that because I think storytelling just goes beyond, your normal entertainment or whether that's a movie.
Yeah.
It's also about so much impact.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just remembering right now Anuja, which was the film that went to Oscars.
Yeah.
I mean, it had such a strong message and it was storytelling, but it was through movies,
Yeah.
right? But then speaking of Rhode, they have done such a phenomenal job. Like,
Of course.
yes, you have a founder. There's so many founder-led brands, but what's the story behind it?
Totally.
India Wild is such a good example. They've been really bringing their community together on like an emotion, right?
Of course.
Which I think is so beautiful. So I'm very excited to like kind of tap more into how you're bridging the gap within CAPE even for the young generation and then for also the people that have become executives now. I am honestly obsessed with how Asian American content and even content that's coming out of East Asia and South Asia is impacting the global entertainment at a large scale right now. And so I have like all of these reports that I've been reading and there's like two different contrasting data points. One is where Asian Americans, we are known to be super streamers, right? Like we're the ones watching the most content, obviously because we're also the largest population in the world. And then we also have the largest spending power, which is about $1.3 trillion. It's insane. That's one side of the story. But then the other side of the story is about representation. And even as of 2025, reports are saying that API representation is just about 3.8% in cable and like 3.2% in streaming.
Yeah.
Now, as someone who's on the inside of an organization that's trying to bridge this gap, what are the challenges that you are actually dealing with, between this data and then projects or people that are actually getting greenlit?
Yeah. I think we're finding that there's incremental progress being made. I think a very visible example is Crazy Rich Asians. I think in our community, when I first got to CAPE or when I started to enter this bubble, even before I was at CAPE, I remember people would refer to it as like pre-CRA and post-CRA. And I think it really made an impact on how other communities outside of the API community, how do people see, what Asians look like or how do they think Asians operate or, what prototype, is it pushing the boundaries of how they would see, an individual or a community or even a destination? Like to your point about other markets, it changed how people see Singapore or Malaysia. And, it became such an interesting way to also talk about tourism. And you're finding these governments are also interested in investing in film and TV because it's such an opportunity to bring and educate the world on their incredible destinations and, of course, continue to support their economies. So that is one really interesting piece of the business that I've learned a lot about in these past few years. That, there are dollars and support and investment coming from so many different avenues. I think to your point, our community has such incredible spending power and something to your point on Anuja, actually, my partner in Mela was an EP on Anuja and she, I think about her as an example as a philanthropist, right? And to your point, there's incredible spending power in our community, but when we look at other communities, there's been a lot of stride on individuals, philanthropists, family funds, whatever the case is, or larger foundations investing into film and TV. And actually, the API community at large has done this in many, many ways. And I think CAPE, is supported by incredible philanthropists. So many organizations you see that are, nonprofits but are focused on storytelling are largely supported by foundations, partners, corporate partners, but then also individuals who are personally really passionate about this work and storytelling. I think in the South Asian diaspora, you're seeing more and more of it over time, but there is a little bit of a culture shift, I think, that's happening right now in this moment. We're finding more philanthropists or, philanthropy and kind of giving is such a core part of our culture. But typically it's been managed in a way where it's going to, of course, thinking about sending it back to our home countries and thinking about education and, of course, hunger and all these issues that are very critical issues, of course, in our, especially for our parents' generation, they have seen and it hits home more. I think on the storytelling piece, people are just now in our community, I would say of the past 10, 15 years, but still we're on kind of the earlier stage of, that maybe curve. I think people are now really investing in that work. So I think you'll start to see more of the impact of that, or you've started to see in the past few years, like many of these films that, have become Oscar nominated, have been Oscar qualifying, whatever the case is. And I think I look at my partner, Anita, as such a great example, as someone who leads by example. She invests in film, she invests in storytelling, she invests in film festivals, and not just in the South Asian community, but communities at large. And I think I look at her as someone who really can inspire others to do so. To your point, to tackle and get brands to see that there's so much spending power, they need to also see our community investing back into itself. And by example, then at large and the mainstream will continue to do so. I think we're finding more and more of that. And so much of, the work that I'm doing now and so many of my peers are doing incredible work in is on that brand piece, understanding how to work with brands and explain to them that there's massive spending power, but also massive impact that our community is capable of powering and mobilizing. And so I think it's a bit of like a mental shift and a psychological shift that is already in motion very much so by so many people who have led us till this point. But I think we're also on the cusp of something larger too, and you'll see more of that in, years to come.
That's very reassuring and exciting. I kind of want to take a step back and do kind of a 101 deep dive, which is, okay, you were talking a lot about brands. Tell me more about how brands are now getting fused into the world of films and storytelling. And then two, completely unrelated to that, is if someone is a storyteller, a filmmaker, and they want to get involved with CAPE, how does that kind of work?
Of course. So first on the brand side, I think to your point, at least for me, like when I think about really, really down to the details about where I'd like to start, I always start with, if there's a brand, a really big mainstream brand, I think about, household names. I always try to find like who the South Asian execs are there, because on a personal level, it's easier for someone on the inside to already understand, like, if you are in our community, or if you've had any interaction with our community, you understand our community has done incredible work on, building wealth in this country. Also understanding that we are spenders, our community has the ability to do so. And as a signifier of the success, we are also consumers. And so I think understanding the kind of cycle there, I always start with, if I can find, another South Asian friend or peer at any of these brands. And I start there and I try to figure out, like, we are building a way for brands to learn about our community and invest in our community. Who are the right people at your respective company that you think would make sense for us to kind of build this conversation and create some more like learning tools around, so that they see that there's so much opportunity here for their bottom line. At the end of the day, of course, from a social impact and philanthropic standpoint, you want people to care and be excited. But at the end, you have to take into consideration the brand's end goal or their priorities. And, for them, it's, if they have a launch coming up, how do you make sure that launch is really successful and support them on that launch. If they have a hero product, is there a way for us to market that product to our community? And for me, it always goes back to, does it make sense? I don't want to be someone who's like a broker of marketing something that doesn't make sense for our community, or a brand that hasn't always backed our community. You want to see that they actually believe in us. And then if there's already this relationship where the brand has kind of exhibited support, how do we then support them back and then show them that there's so much power in the South Asian community broadly, the South Asian diaspora, and then the API community at large.
Absolutely.
And so that's one part. I think the thoughtfulness on finding that match, it's like dating, making sure that it makes sense for both parties is really important. But then to your point on CAPE, I think with CAPE, really the core of CAPE's work are the programs, the fellowships, the New Writers Program, our finishing fund. We work closely with showrunners. So I think if you fall, across any of these categories, our programs are the best way to kind of get connected with CAPE. We have open applications. Everything is really, broad and open and meant to be inclusive. So anyone can apply. And the resources that, our alumni or our participants really get to access are connections with studios, our, alumni. We have relationships across, different sectors of the industry. And so we really try to support folks who are coming through our programs, both while they're in the program and then after. Something that is kind of the invisible work of an organization like CAPE is behind the scenes connecting people. So if someone, is looking for a new role and they, the industry keeps changing, it's contracted a lot. So, we're finding that there are people who are looking for work, and often our alumni will come to CAPE with, hey, I have this opening for an assistant, or I have an opening for, I'm looking for a writer. And so that kind of matchmaking behind the scenes is a lot of the invisible work that CAPE is doing, and I think is really the reason why people get excited about CAPE's work and stay connected with it as an organization throughout their careers.
Yeah. Wow, that's actually so incredible, and it's so needed. And I think it's not just like a coast by coast thing where it's like happening in New York or happening in LA. I think this is happening in Chicago as well. It's happening all over, and so people actually getting to know about CAPE and the work that's being done is so incredible. So kudos to the entire team, because I know there's a lot of people that go into the behind the scenes of this.
It's a small but very mighty team. It's 6 people, which is
what?
wild. I know.
Oh wait, I did not
but
know that.
Punching above its weight. I mean, because it's 6 people as far as the core team, but then CAPE has an incredible board of advisors and then an executive board, and so all of these folks are titans in the industry, alumni of the programs, are execs at studios, and so it's a very much like collaborative effort. But the core team is 6 people, which is
that's wild.
Incredible.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, and so, but to your point, there are a lot of people involved in bringing this to life. We have our partners at the studios who really understand the impact of CAPE's work. CAPE also consults for a number of these studios. So it's like, there's this really, really beautiful relationship on how these orgs all work together. But I think on your point, it's really not something that's meant to be just for, the micro community of Los Angeles. The industry is shifting. People are filming everywhere. These roles exist across the board. And so there's a lot of ways for someone to become involved with an organization like CAPE, but because it's really, it's nimble and it's small, but the reach is broad, I think the best way for someone to get engaged with CAPE, and actually the way that I first learned about CAPE is I followed them on Instagram. And I remember before I had even applied or, had been connected with the team. Last year, they had a house at Sundance, and they were hosting people and offering accommodations for people who were going to Sundance. But of course, it's a really expensive endeavor to take on. And a lot of my friends and peers who were going to Sundance, I had forwarded them CAPE's Instagram post and said, like, if you're going, you should apply because this is such a cool opportunity. And I remember just thinking it was so unique and just an incredible contribution to someone who is making the effort to get there, spending out of pocket. But then it's just such an expensive thing to take on. So I thought that was just like such a cool way to give direct access. And that's how I initially learned about them.
That's awesome.
And then continued to support their work in any way I could. And then, was connected with the team. But it really starts, I think, on social media. It really is such an incredible tool in so many regards. But even for me, career-wise.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I think, yes, we had LinkedIn, but so many of the things that I find out now is on Instagram.
Totally.
Which is amazing. Now, speaking of Cape is representing a community at large, and Rhode kind of built this huge community, and they're two completely separate worlds in all. But they kind of, I think, stir from the same engine, which is emotion and storytelling, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I want to understand from you, what did Hailey Bieber's brand really teach you about culture and how it kind of moves people both in an organization and outside an organization? Yeah. And how do you take your learnings and translate that into Cape?
Yeah. I think most importantly, something I loved about Rhode was there was such a focus, although, of course, from a founder perspective, someone so notable and, very well known. But I think there was a really focused effort on building the brand even outside of an individual and building the brand around an emotion, like you said, and creating a community. So making it really focused on the people who are using the products, loving the products. What's their feedback, and how is the feedback being applied? I think that as a core principle is something that is so translatable to any business, any organization, nonprofit, for-profit, whatever the case is. I think this feedback loop of focusing on who your community is, being really clear on who that is, so that when there's feedback, when there's ways to pivot, when there's a new product, whether that's a program, depending on whatever your product or output is, I think knowing who your community is and being really clear on that is a really good North Star. Mm-hmm. And I think Rhode did a great job at that. Yeah. And I think with Cape, similarly, there's a big focus on, who the community is, but understanding, there's certain sectors of entertainment broadly that we may not serve or service in now, but there might be room later. And also because roles and jobs are all evolving and everything's kind of melding together. I think about someone in music. Cape may not very blatantly, focus on the music industry, but executives in music may at some point have some transitioning point to film and TV, or, there's so many ways these businesses are all intertwined. And so there are ways to focus and support that community, but I think being clear on what the needs are of your community and being able to listen to them and apply feedback is really important. And I think I was really amazed. I didn't even know this about Rhode before I got there, but once I got there and, saw how the business is run, I think the feedback that they apply from their community and then take forward into how they continue to build is beautiful. And also, I think something I've continued to admire about them is Hailey and the brand, they're so up to date on what's on the internet. They are listening to their community and they're so timely with it. And I think that is something that makes the brand really exciting and relatable for people. And so, that's something that I feel like, really helped the brand, but I think translates to Cape as well.
I actually love that. I think you mentioned feedback loop multiple times as you were talking about Cape and Rhode. And I think we often, as storytellers, forget about it because I think you're trying to tell so many stories at the same time and everyone has so many different lived experiences. But if you actually listen to the feedback, you can find the common thread in all of these lived experiences. Yeah. And I think Rhode's doing that. And with Cape, it's kind of different. But if you use that same element into Cape, it can actually reach bigger and newer heights every single day.
Definitely.
So I think that's huge.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about Mela. You've mentioned it, but I don't know if everyone knows about Mela. Yeah. And I was also like, I had to research a little bit, and I came across one of your interviews, which was senior year at NYU.
You really pulled that out of the archives. When I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot about this from so long ago.
I need to know what Chandni was up to. Yeah. And you ended up telling in the interview that you wanted to be like a community leader specifically for women, and that, you felt close to your South Asian identity, and that's something you would kind of want to do in the space. And I was like, wow, you're actually doing all of that.
It's so funny. I didn't remember that at all. You like file away different chapters of your life just as life gets busier. And it was a really special moment to even see you mention that, because you're right. I guess that was always a focus, but I didn't even put these two pieces together in my own life.
Yeah, it's like you say something and you forget about it, but actually like subconsciously it's kind of in your head, and opportunities find you find opportunities. And I actually saw Mela's post last year I think Renu was at the
Yeah.
event, and so that's how I got introduced to Mela.
Yeah.
Tell us more about what Mela Collective
Yeah.
is and how are you building community around South Asian
Definitely.
creators and leaders in the space now?
Yeah. So Mela Collective is honestly a labor of love. It's myself and my partner Anita, who I had mentioned. She has been an incredible philanthropist for most of her life. Her family really invests in our community. As you know, I've really focused my career on social impact and understanding how do we enact change within our communities by investment from other entities, you know? And so I have been able to do that for so many communities, but I think the South Asian community, there's so many incredible orgs in our space. And I think it's so incredible that there's focus on like the marketing side, thinking about community. But on the social impact and investment side, I think that was a skill that I know that I've been able to build. And in my partner, Anita, she is an example of someone who actually does that. So we had met and we really wanted to build a space that we could bring our community together and continue to help amplify South Asian tastemakers, founders, executives to the mainstream and to the masses. I think our goal is really how do we, of course, bring our community together, but then support them on whatever their trajectory is. If they're building a business, if they have a film, how do we help level that up in a way that, you know, takes one thing off their plate. So, you know, as a creative or you're a builder or a founder, you have so many competing priorities because you're focused on what your product is or your end goal, right?
Yeah.
But then it's a lot for someone to take on. How do I also think about the PR component? How do I think about, you know, the thought leadership? How do I build like a just profile around me as a founder, you know, now on social media, that's such a big component. And then how do I get myself to all the events to make sure that I'm representing my brand or company in the best way? And so we really want to build spaces that, you know, help solve for a little bit of that. I don't think it's a solve for everything. I think there's so much that comes with being someone who's trying to build from the ground up. But, you know, a great example is at Sundance this year. We hosted in partnership with Women in Film, just like a cocktail hour toast type of celebration. And the goal was to bring together the Global South. So the idea was filmmakers, both from Women in Films Network and Mela's community. How do we bring everyone together in just a celebratory way? You know, you've been at panels all day. You're like you have your networking hat on. How do we bring it down to just a social environment where there's a really, really incredible high caliber of person in this room, but it's meant to just kind of strip you down to just a comfortable environment. And it was really beautiful because people, you know, from that event have become EPs on each other's films. We've seen people now become project partners and, you know, are ideating on, you know, some of their collaborations in the future. And, you know, people didn't want to go home. So I think that's always the good signifier for a gathering that, you know, worked out and a good party. But I think the idea is that outside of course, the celebration and togetherness, the goal is that you're bringing people together who may not always be in these rooms, you know, they may not have the name that you recognize, but they are building, you know, they're behind the scenes and they are the ones who maybe, you know, already have decision power, investment power, but they're not the one who is already in these rooms. I think that really is kind of where we're focusing and that niche that we really want to make sure we double click into. It's how do we get people who are behind the scenes into rooms together, because so many of these folks don't even realize that they could meet and be in these spaces and collaborate, but it's just they haven't had that platform to kind of be in togetherness, you know? And so that's one example. We hosted a Diwali in LA this past year. It's called Diwali Royale. We're doing it again this year. We're very excited. And it's become kind of a tradition. I think now we're entering technically our third year. The first year was a smaller iteration. Last year was a really big showing. And we had a number of brands, and not just South Asian brands, but brands broadly invest in the event. And that was really special. I think when we were sending the invitation out, people were responding or texting me on the side like, I can't believe this brand, like, you know, rides for us that way. And that's really exciting, I think, to your point on what it represents. It shows people that there's investment into our community and these brands are excited to support us in a moment that maybe they don't have a super, you know, blatant return, but it's just like this community building effort and investment into a celebration of our community. And so I thought that was just a beautiful moment and it was really lovely to see the reaction to it. So that's what we're building. We, you know, did our moment at Sundance. We have other aspirations of, you know, thinking about a moment perhaps in New York. We'd love to do one in Chicago and just bring the community together in a way that intermixes execs, creatives, founders, and just people across our community who can, build almost this cohort that can support each other down the road.
Oh my gosh. More power to you.
Thank you.
Congratulations. This is huge. And I mean, for me, also, like, off script comes from that, right? Like, there's so many people behind the scenes. And of course, we need our leaders and the champions that are, getting South Asian specifically on the center stage. But there's so many people doing the work. And, like, who are those people, right? And when we're having those conversations, when we're getting to share their stories on our platforms, that's the whole purpose of it, right?
Yeah.
And then you connect with someone like, oh, you saw that person on the podcast, I know them, or like I've been meaning to work with them. It becomes a form of connection at some sort, right?
Yeah.
But I love that you're doing that with Mela. I also love that you're bridging the East and West with like women in film and Mela, and now like wanting to activate in all these different cities. You're not just limiting yourself to the LA community and allowing the LA community to be a part of all these different cities as well. It's so important that we all collectively come together and make magic happen on screens. It's so important. And like, if we're not supporting, then who else is at the end of the day?
Yeah, and I think that is something that I think we talk about this in our community where there's like a lot of infighting or people, like gatekeeping, right?
Yeah.
I think the way that we get others to invest in us, and when I say others, I mean from individuals to brands to anyone, right?
Yeah.
Is more collaboration internally so that there is a kind of image of our community that is already uplifting for itself, and then others want to be a part of that. You know, I think when we're fighting with each other or kind of keeping each other out of rooms, I think it's hard for brands or individuals or whoever has that investment power to feel like it makes sense for them to invest because they're looking for kind of maximum reach, right? And that comes from sharing with each other and ideating together and, building together. And so I think it starts with us partnering and lifting up each other and collaborating as a signifier that this can happen on an even larger scale if we have the right resources.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I have a question for you on that. I feel like when you're building something from scratch, a lot of times when you're reaching out to investors or even brands, it is kind of natural for them to be like, okay, well, but what are your numbers? Like, do you have your own following or do you have your own community?
Yeah.
But it's like, maybe not now, but it's like on the rise because the mission is so important. How do you convince these investors on the mission before these numbers even exist?
Yeah, I think to your point, data is really helpful. And so there's a lot of organizations and incredible kind of entities that do this research. I think the Asian American Foundation is one that, I love their research and they do a lot of research into our community. I think, we had talked about it before too, but they do a lot of research on what spending power looks like or what representation looks like in the API community at large. But then, of course, there's cuts of this information that relate to the South Asian community. I think if you don't have that following yourself yet or your brand doesn't have it yet, I think the research really helps because what I'm finding is that sometimes brands don't even have an idea of the reach of our community or the power or the spending ability. And so they might know about Asians across the board or the Asian diaspora. They might know what spending habits look like in Asia itself, right? And the power. And of course, we're seeing, regions have incredible moments that are global. Like, for instance, K-dramas or K-beauty or whatever the case is, and it's like become a global phenomenon, rightfully so, because it's powered by science, powered by numbers, But I think with the South Asian community, there's just a little bit of education that's required on where there is opportunity. And so I think that's a great starting point. Sometimes people don't even know that our community is one of the largest in the world. That is such a high-level stat that I have met so many brand folks who don't know about that, but it's not even to their fault. That might not be the community that they were really hyper-focused on, and they didn't realize that this was, a major opportunity for them. Yeah. And so the data really helps when you don't have that number or reach yet. And I also think on the smaller level, on the micro level, I'm finding brands and more, especially because they look for engagement. They look for what community really means. That word is thrown around all the time. But we're finding that smaller creators, smaller brands, founders have a really strong tie with the people who do follow them or are looking for, inspiration on, career advice, or they're looking for even an outfit or, whatever the case is. I think those micro influencers, micro creators, micro founders, whatever you want to call it, I think the power they have is really, really strong nowadays. And there's a lot of, I think, movement on seeing the impact at that level and not only the really large numbers. Of course, that is, really significant and carries its weight. But there is definitely, I think, a better understanding on the micro level too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Nano influencers, like their engagement is topping charts.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because you feel like they're your friend.
Exactly.
You can actually talk to them. They're responding to your comments, and you may not get that from the largest creator only because there's so much volume. And so I think that connection is what people are looking for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that segues into my favorite round, which is a rapid fire round.
Okay, amazing.
Okay, are you ready?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Number 1, a brand that gets culture right.
Oh my gosh, rapid fire. I would say, I think to Indie Wild. I think that's a great example. I think they're branching into Sephora.
Yeah.
I think they understand that culture and community doesn't just mean hyper focusing on us, but also the people that we love and, faces that we love or, examples that we love outside of even our community or ingredients that we want in our products.
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah.
Like, such a huge fan. Okay, awesome. That was a good answer. A trend in storytelling that you're absolutely tired of.
I think the prototype of a South Asian woman who's just like a bookworm. I think we are, well, first, I've never been a bookworm, so I can't relate to that.
Yes.
But I think we are really making strides in seeing South Asian women as these dynamic, multifaceted characters and individuals. And so I'm happy that we're moving away from that bookworm narrative.
Yeah, it's so important because I couldn't relate to that either. If you left everything today, what would you be building from scratch?
I think I would be building something that looks like Mela, honestly. And so that's why I really love that it's become this passion project. It's really like a labor of love. Yeah. But I think that I always feel most excited when I see two people who should know each other meeting for the first time and we're kind of circling each other but never had that moment. Yeah. That brings me so much joy, being able to facilitate that. And so something that looks like Mela, I think I always wanted to build a community that is focused on intentional connection. And so I think that's what I would be building. And so in this iteration and this version of me, it looks like that. But definitely some type of form or format for folks to meet and connect.
Yeah. Okay, I love that. I need to see a Mela event.
I know. We'll do one in Chicago.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. One myth about diversity in Hollywood you want to break?
I think that there isn't representation. I think there's such a high volume of people, right? Yeah. And I think there are so many people behind the scenes who are trying to make those changes and help cast and, change narratives. I think there is a lot of work being done behind the scenes. I think what we need more support on is distribution. We need more support on, financing. We need more support on getting these projects to be on your screen. Yeah. But I think there's so much work being done behind the scenes and so many things that are in development. Yeah. But it's unfortunate we don't see so many of these projects come to life. But, there are so many other formats. That's why I'm really loving short films. I think that's a really beautiful way for creators or filmmakers to tell the story they want to tell. But I think what I want to dispel is that it isn't happening. I think it is happening. It's just we need more tools and resources to get it to your screens.
Absolutely. And also just kind of like a message for the audience. I think sometimes we get into this mindset of complaining like, oh, we're not seeing this or like, oh, I don't relate to this character. Yeah. I would love for the audience to dig deeper as they're looking at, South Asian stories on screen. Yeah. Like, see the people behind the camera. I mean, we just interviewed Maureen Barucha and she's done shows on Peacock and things like that. But you wouldn't know if you actually research, of right? Course. So look into it a little bit more.
I am very optimistic. I think to the point that maybe it's a fault, but my view is that I think this collaborative power we have is really, really, strong. And I think there's something incredible we could build together and it's already happening and it's, not just me by any means. It's all of us. It's you. It's so many people. But that collective power is really, really incredible and has so much, potential. Yeah. So that's my outlook. I think there are incredible things ahead and there's a lot of work being done. It's just finding the right people to collaborate with. And that's, a lot of the work that we're trying to do is bring people into the rooms together so they can
Yeah.
do that.
Absolutely. I feel like we're on the same boat with like the vision that we have for
Oh,
this
of course.
community. I love it.
I mean, you have to be positive. There,
Yeah.
you know, it's nowadays, I think that is something that for me, like my own internal positivity or from my friends or my family or, you know, new friends like you, I think that is what keeps me going because it's so easy to get caught up in, you know, of course, the hardships, the struggles, the everything happening in the world. I think that is very easy to get caught up in. And the only thing, you know, we can do is try to hold on to that because if not, then what are we making all of this for? You know, or building all of this for?
Exactly. Okay, that was awesome. Last question is, what is an advice that you would give to your younger self?
I think that I would give myself the advice to just take a second, stop, and kind of soak it in and not worry so much. I think I was always worried. I was a planner, you know, in undergrad. I mean, not even undergrad. We're talking like middle school, stressing about getting into the high school I wanted, and then all of high school stressing about college, and then all of college stressing about, you know, I'm not going to be a doctor. What do I do? How do I tell my parents? And so I think my path has been one till this point, and who knows what the future holds, but everything has worked out in the end. And it's really led me to, I fully believe I'm in the right place in the right moment. And I can't even believe my life most of the time. I love it and I'm so grateful. But I don't think I could have ever pictured this. You know, this is not something I could have planned. Ending up here in this path and all these twists and turns and moving to LA, all of this. Meeting my husband who at the time was living in LA. Like there's no way I could have predicted this, but I spent so much time trying to figure out what my future would hold. And so I wish I could give myself the advice to kind of just take a breath, relax, and just go with the flow. I think I spent a lot of time and a lot of nights just stressing that I could have saved myself the anxieties and the pressure, you know? I think the pressure, I do think some pressure helps you and it pushes you and encourages you and motivates you. But I think there's like a healthy balance of that. And I definitely didn't have that healthy balance for a lot of my, I would say, teen years and early 20s. And I think only in the past few years have I found that balance for myself and just learn to trust the process a bit more.
Yeah, I love that you're saying that because I'm applying that to myself. I think a lot of us, especially like ambitious women, we want to do everything all at once and we feel like we have to follow the plan.
Definitely.
And we lose the plot. And I've been reminding myself this over and over again, especially because of social media. You do end up losing the plot. So like, why did you start even in the first place? Just like take it easy.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really believe, I don't know if this is a little woo-woo. My husband thinks I'm a witch, but I really believe in putting it out into the universe. Like I think about when I got to LA a few years ago, I would see these incredible moments happening for South Asians, right? And I didn't know what my interaction with that was going to be at some point, you know, but I knew in my heart, I was like, I want to support and build and collaborate and like cheer these people on because I'm so happy that all of this is happening. And I will say that a lot of it is your energy, right? I never looked at those spaces as like, I should be in those rooms. Why am I not in these rooms right now? I think I took it as like, I need to build and I need to work hard and show people that I can contribute and really support and help, you know? And that will get me into the right spaces or right places that I should be or can be and want to be, right? And I think for me, that has been really helpful. And so it's really helped me to not have a scarcity mindset. You know, to your point on social media, sometimes you see things online and you're like, oh, what? I wasn't there or I wasn't included. And I think that is a really detrimental headspace to be in because it's really easy to get lost in that. Absolutely. I think for me, a major shift that has been helpful, and I try to approach it because in this industry, it's really the only way you can be because you'll always feel like you're not a part of something, right? Is just to figure out, like, how do I build so that I am the person who can be in that space and can help and continue to uplift. You know, I think over time, it's like you end up where you're meant to be. Yeah. I think if you rush the process, you may end up in that space or that room, but you're not going to be there because you're building longevity. You know, it might be a fluke or it might be like a flash. And I think building something that is sustainable and has longevity and, you know, you have the right support system in place gets you much further and also makes you feel more secure. You know, I don't have an anxiety right now of like, this could disappear in a day. And it's because I know I've built relationships and a support system around me. But I've definitely been in that place before. You know, sometimes you get in a room and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I ended up here. And you have that mindset. if you don't feel the same if you have that infrastructure around you.
Yeah, that was great advice and like
Thank
a
you.
great end to rapid fire.
Thank you. Although that was not rapid at all on my part, but
I love that. No, the more in depth we go with the
Yeah.
rapid fires, the better. Okay, so I want to now talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
Cape. And like, I think we touched on this briefly when we were chatting earlier as to how it's kind of global now,
Yeah.
right? The lines are super blurry. I mean, Netflix India is global now.
Yeah.
K-dramas, like you were saying, is kind of become mainstream.
Yeah.
And then we have South Asian actors being cast in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So it's kind of all becoming like this global entertainment landscape.
Yeah.
Tell me more about when you were kind of having these conversations at Cape specifically. How are you looking at API storytelling now, not just from like an American creator's lens, but also like how global entertainment, specifically from Asia, is intersecting with the
Yeah.
US?
So I think the first point is that you're right, these two entities are very much intermixing, working together, investing in each other. And now as viewers, we watch what we're interested in, not only what is put in front of us, right? So
Yeah.
people are seeking out, shows, movies from other regions, vice versa in Asia. Lots of American or Western content is being consumed. And so I think the biggest part that I've seen, at least from Cape's perspective, is interest and investment from other regions on having their filmmakers maybe come to LA. We have a program that we run with Japan, for instance, on having their filmmakers come to the US, go through a series of sessions, tools, kind of learning opportunities and networking opportunities, so that once they're back in Japan making their project, building their film, they have this network around them that's based in Hollywood too. And so there's this kind of seeding that you're seeing on both ends, and that investment is coming both from, I would say, definitely here in the US, but you're finding a lot of it abroad. And there's just a focus on understanding, the American market and how to kind of work your way through this maze that is Hollywood. And I think an organization like Cape really helps with something like that, understanding, who the different players are and how do you find your entrance path into a studio or into, any room of, potentially filmmakers or EPs or whatever the case is, or just film financiers generally. And so I think Cape is trying to facilitate that, but it has to come from, I think for Cape, the interest is always on what is the narrative shift, what is the storytelling goal, and that should always be the intention, I think, at least for an organization like Cape.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that was great perspective. I didn't know about that, like how different countries right now are seeding into each other's global entertainment landscape. So it's really nice to see that nonprofits like Cape are actually doing the work behind the scenes. And that's the whole point of these conversations. Like, we're truly getting to see what's happening, what's being made, and like what's getting greenlit.
Yeah. I think with Cape, for instance, so much of the power is the network, right?
Yeah.
And so you're finding that brands or studios or countries and governments and tourism boards are seeing that is so powerful, because if you're not in the weeds of it, if you haven't understood how to kind of manage your way through a film festival, it's so daunting.
Yes.
And so having a partner or consultant or an org like Cape is really helpful for these boards or organizations or countries or regions. We're finding that more and more, they just need someone to help them understand how to tackle this beast that is, film and TV in, the West.
Yeah.
But it is much less daunting if you have a partner and an ally like an organization to help guide you through that. And so I think that will continue to be a growing piece of Cape's work. It's definitely an interest on building further relationships across the globe, of course, across Asia. But, the Asian diaspora is around the world. So
Absolutely.
Who knows where that will take us.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, now I know you briefly mentioned, you didn't be a doctor, and like, how would you tell your parents? Tell us more about, what did you study in college?
Yeah. So I studied in undergrad psychology and neuroscience. I started as a chem major. I was pre-med at NYU. I was pre-med for a few years. I got to organic chemistry, and I remember I got a 0 on one of my tests, and I emailed the professor, "Are you sure you gave me points for work?" He's like, "I'm sure you got a 0." I'm like, "Okay,
oh my
well,"
God.
which is okay. I needed that. Sometimes you need to be told, like, this is not for you.
Yeah.
And I think I wasn't even enjoying it. I was doing it because I thought I had to, like so many. I think this is a very, very common experience amongst folks in our community. But I think I was doing it because, like so many of us, I just wanted to make my parents proud. And then I realized that I'm not getting any joy out of this at all. Like, if I push myself, I'm a good enough learner. I can figure it out. I can kind of begrudgingly get through it, but I'm not feeling any amount of joy through this. And more than that, I love learning. I was not feeling intellectually stimulated by any of this. I'm learning and consuming all this information, but I wasn't excited about the information, or I didn't find that it applied. And I actually think that was the first time in my life I realized that the type of learner I am is I need to see immediate application. So like even in my career, I've really enjoyed, as through the trajectory of my career, I've gotten closer and closer to being the consumer and the end user of what I'm helping build.
Yeah.
I think at Goldman that was the furthest I felt from being a consumer of, the end product. At Rhode, I felt much closer because I'm a consumer of beauty and skincare and all of it. And now at Cape, I love film and TV. I grew up watching TV every single night with my mom and my sister and my dad. And so I think now I'm super close to that. But that was the first time I learned that the way that I feel excited and the way that I learn is through feeling like it's applicable to my day-to-day.
Yeah.
And so then I had taken a psych neuro class, and I loved it. I loved understanding how people work and how we communicate, how we all interact. And so that really gave me a sense of joy and excitement. So I started to pursue, or I got, I had my psych and neuroscience degree. I started to pursue applying to psych PhDs. And around the same time, I was invited by a former peer at NYU who is now at Goldman to just come over for coffee to their office. And then I didn't know it ended up becoming an interview. And it was, the best moment, I think, for me. It's such a serendipitous interaction, but ended up being something that has led me here today. And I loved meeting the team, learning about what an institution like Goldman was doing, and also understanding that they're putting so much money into investing in communities and understanding how they support communities on a really meaningful level down to the end user. Female founders, if you're looking at small businesses, they're kind of thinking about it holistically, and I loved that. And then for me, at that time, I was also like, Goldman is a brand that my parents will recognize. So, okay, if I can't be a doctor, I'll give them something that they know, and they can call people and tell them that, that's what they wanted. They wanted to know that all their effort led to me being somewhere that is, notable for them. And so it's funny because I think that wasn't intentionally part of my decision making, but subconsciously I think it definitely was. And I definitely learned more of that as I got to that point, as I got the job and then built my career there. I saw how proud they were because honestly, now my parents couldn't tell you what my job is. I think now it's like
do they understand what Cape's doing?
Not at all. And I don't think they have any understanding of what I do day to day. Like they think that I throw the volley party. And so, but I think they understand that I love bringing people together. I love meeting people. I love supporting people. So they understand that in some way is part of what I do. But I'm glad I started at a place like Goldman so they could hold on to that. And then, now my mom loves Rhode products. Her whole beauty routine is like curated by my sister and I. But I think it's also really special now, projects that I may not have had a direct impact on or hand in, but I know Cape has support in some way, or Cape's alumni, it's something they're watching on their TVs. And so that is really special. And I think for me, that relatability is always important. Actually, going back to the point of appealing to the mass or kind of bringing something mainstream, I think that is something I'll always try to incorporate into my work, because the way that I think you see success from any level is not only our own community investing in each other or, investing into projects or buying products. We need to appeal to the masses for us to see truly scalable success.
Absolutely.
And so I always use what my parents are consuming as a signifier of that, because of course, outside of what they're watching from Bollywood, they are consuming things that are marketed to them. They're consuming things that are, in the commercials. They're seeing things that are in front of them in the way that, any American consumer is making their decisions. And so I always use that as a reference point.
I love that. And I feel like you're going to use this interview 10 years from now and we'll be like, okay, let's see what you're doing now.
Like, let's see. Yeah. And then you're going to reference that article from 10 years before. I'm like, wow, you really unearthed that one.
I know. I want to know, okay, so like what's next for you? What are you building currently that we'll get to see a year from now?
Yeah. So one thing that's really exciting on the Cape front, Cape is celebrating 35 years. And so this year we have a really special celebration in October. It'll be Cape's 35th anniversary gala. And it's really a celebration of the history of API storytelling, all of the strides that our community has made at large, and then also looking at what this next gen looks like. You know, what does film and TV look like in this next iteration when we're going through so many shifts from technology to, you know, what the job actually looks like. And so I think it'll be a really special moment. So that's in October. I'm really looking forward to that as kind of an immediate outlet of celebration. On the Mela front, we are really thinking through how we continue to get brands and partners and foundations to invest into the South Asian community. So we'll definitely be having other touch points throughout this year that are in person. We want to do something we're working on, hopefully in London. We're doing something this summer.
Awesome.
And then most excitingly, we're very, very much looking forward to our Diwali this year. I think we're going to build on what we've already had. So last year was really special and had an incredible kind of reception to that and feedback. And so we want to build on it further this year. And so would love to have you all there.
Oh, that's awesome.
But that'll be in November. So we have a little bit of time after Cape celebration. And then personally, honestly, I am building my life in LA. You know, my husband and I are now a few years into being married. We're thinking about how do we see our next chapter there and how do we build our life there further. But, you know, our family's on the East Coast. We have family here in Chicago. So I think this global way of living and bi-coastal or tri-coastal, whatever you want to call it, is really growing for so many people. And we're lucky that we have some level of flexibility. You know, we have home bases in different cities. And so I'm not really seeing myself in one place only, but figuring out how to have a home base and then build my life in other places too and our life together.
Yeah,
so,
and I mean, what you're building professionally too, it kind of requires you to be in all these different spaces. So
absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, Cape definitely, you know, our biggest kind of markets and networks are in, of course, in LA, in New York, in the Bay Area. You're finding a lot of folks in the Bay Area are investing in film and TV.
Yeah.
Of course, in Chicago, these major cities, and then broadly outside of the U.S. too.
Absolutely.
And so I think that'll continue to take us to really incredible places. But I think we've been on the move, and I love being on the move.
Yeah.
And so who knows where that'll take us next.
Well,
But
I'm so excited for you. That's incredible. And my last question, who is another person that you would nominate that Offscript needs to hear from?
Yeah, I think Anita. I think you got to chat with Anita. I think understanding how someone who's actually putting their money where their mouth is, you know, investing in our community, someone who is a philanthropist in all essences of that word, I think is really special. And she's been, you know, incredible kind of guide for me, but also so many of the projects that, you know, have been really special moments for the South Asian community over the past few years and other ones that are in the pipeline, you know, she's been able to support. And to that point, understanding what gets someone excited to invest in a project, I think would be really helpful for people to learn about.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Yeah. We would love to have her on then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Of course.
This was such an incredible conversation. Thank you for being on Offscript.
Of course. Thank you. Chicago, you're going to the end.